What a powerful episode on the Real Success Podcast. I am super excited to share this one with you. This was such a powerful episode of the Real Success Podcast. I sit down with Max Zima from Zima Automotive to talk through his story of being an entrepreneur and building a thriving mechanic business. From struggling with drugs and alcohol to creating a thriving environment for him and his family to supporting the other families of all of his coworkers. This one you don't want to miss. Welcome to the Real Success Podcast, Max. I appreciate you being on. I'm super excited to hear your story. Max owns Zima Automotive, a local mechanic shop in the area. So, Max, I want to go ahead and just start by kind of learning a little bit more about you and tell me a little bit about your story and kind of how you got your start with Zima.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate this. I love this community and being a part of it in any way I can. I don't know, I guess it's a bit of a loaded question how I got started with Zima, but I think it would all go back to childhood. My dad was a mechanic for a little bit. He took more of the college route and then ended up in corporate offices of Chrysler, but very, very mechanically inclined. So we grew up working on our own stuff. I always want to be like my dad. He's was and still is a hero of mine. And sorry, choked up when I think about him. And yeah, I just wanted to do what he was doing. I wanted to be like him. I still remember in third grade when I lived in Kansas, we had to do a career day and pick your career, and everyone's like, "I'm gonna be an astronaut. I'm gonna be a police officer." I was like, "I'm gonna be a mechanic." And I remember the teacher back, "Now, Max, you can be anything. You don't have to be a mechanic." And I'm like, "No, I'm gonna be a mechanic because my dad's a mechanic." And I think at that early age, it was ingrained in my brain, that's what I wanted to do because that's who Dad was. And it's just something that's always come really natural to me. The ability to fix things, the way my brain works. It's almost like I'm at the most peace in my life when I'm working hard. And when I'm working on cars, whether that transpires into other areas of trades or hard work, but I like hard work. I like getting dirty. I just like the physical aspect of work, and mechanics is great. It's like a giant puzzle. Love puzzles, just my mind again, it's just, it calms me down. It kind of allows me to pause everything else that's going on in life, and just look for right now, I'm right here. And why is this happening? Why is this vehicle acting this way? Or why is this situation happening this way? And how do I get into that? So that's always just been kind of the gearing of my mind and how it worked, no pun intended there. But, I don't even know. I think I got my first start in an actual shop was probably in the high school area, working at an oil change, and just kind of transgressed from there. I did go to a college for it. I went through a trade program. It was I want to say I think I went to a CTC. Sorry, it's been a long time, but it was for auto body. So I thought I was going to be a painter at one time, and decided not to do that. Went more on the mechanic side. So I did go to a college program called the Chrysler Apprenticeship Program. It was a 2-year program at a community college in Michigan. Don't hold that against me. And it was really cool how they had set up. You would do a half day in the classroom and then a half day at a dealership. So you get paired up with a dealership. And so it was book with immediate hands-on. And so then they would kind of move you around the dealership depending on what you're learning and what you're studying. And it was just perfect. It worked really well for what it was, and just really decided I enjoyed this. This is what I want to do. It was a great way to make money. And like I said, it was just that I think more than anything, it was that piece about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you one of those guys, I am at least, where you learn better by doing something? I think they call it kinesthetic learning, I think.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I love being hands-on. I'd rather take something apart and figure out how it works. I'm should not have done it in that order. And, I could read a book 1,000 times on it, but until I get my hands into it, it clicks with me that way.
Perfect. And then, so you went to the Philippines for a little while, is that right? Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of how that helped kind of shape your reality?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, it was a huge part of my life. I was in the Philippines for about 7 years altogether. I wouldn't say they're straight. I would do about a year, sometimes 2 years, and then I'd come back to Ohio and do some fundraising and work with that. But I think really to talk about the Philippines, I would have to go further back and kind of talk how I even got to the Philippines, if that's good with you.
Yeah.
And again, that all started from childhood. For those who know me, and then for those who don't, I'm an alcoholic and I'm a drug addict in recovery. And I remember I was probably about 6 to 7 years old when I tasted my first beer. I remember we lived in Louisiana at the time. I still remember it to this day. I remember grabbing a beer out of the bottom shelf of the fridge. I think it was an old Milwaukee, had that red label on it. That's what my dad had. And to clarify in case he's listening, he was not the type of alcoholic you see in movies, where he's just beating everybody. I don't mean to make a joke of it, but he was very controlled with it, but there was always alcohol around in my family, right? And so what you saw as a kid, want to be like dad. So I remember taking it, rode down to the creek and drank some of it. Thought it was disgusting, and I don't think I finished the beer, which is probably good because I was very young. And kind of transgressing more into like the high school area. I was my brother, he was a very popular kid. He was one everybody wanted to be around and be like. And then there was me. I was very awkward in the middle school, high school area of life, and didn't know who I was, very unsure of myself, but wanted that deep desire to kind of just be important, and never found it. I kept striking out with all my awkwardness, and so ended up getting into drinking. I found out like, hey, I can be a party animal and I can be really good at it. And so I became known as the guy who could get drunk anywhere and anytime. And we would find ways to get alcohol. I remember at one point in high school, we were keeping beers in our gym locker. We had a female gym instructor, so they weren't allowed into the men's locker room. So we'd keep our beer stashed in there. We'd actually drink in between classes. We'd go down, slam a few beers. And then along with alcohol and the partying, it was only a matter of time before the drugs were introduced, and started with some prescription drugs, moved into, marijuana, cocaine, acid, crack. It was the Detroit area in the 90s. So there was a lot of drugs available. And again, I found I could do those really well. I had a really high tolerance, maybe drop my edge. I could just be crazy Max, and that's kind of what my identity became, was no longer anything else, but that's why I had to be cool and fun Max. I got in a lot of trouble, with the law. Started getting in trouble with the law when I was 13 years old, when I had my first case. And that, again, kept transgressing until I was 17. I was a senior in high school. At this point, I knew things were wrong. I knew things were off. I knew this wasn't right. It wasn't like I was doing it like, hey, this is normal. This is what everybody should be doing. Like there was a sense of right and wrong with everything. But I still, I couldn't just stop it. And I'm like, well, you know what I could do? I loved the military. Always loved the military. I had a passion for it. My grandpa was in the Army, Air Force. It was the Air Force before it was the Air Force. I think they had a special thing for it in the Army. World War II time. A couple other military guys in the family. My dad was not. But it was something I'm like, man, that'd be cool. I'd like to do that. Like, I always had this pride for our nation, a pride for America, and what it could offer. And I'm like, I'd do that. And I thought the Marines were the toughest. It was just really, again, in the 90s. So it was before we knew a lot about the Navy SEALs and the Rangers. A lot of that stuff was secret for a while. And so I'm like, I'll be a Marine because they're, they're the baddest of the badass, and they're just some badasses. And that's who I'm going to be. I'm going to go for it. That was always me. Take it to the extreme. Like, if one's good, 30's got to be better. So I actually went through that. I actually got sworn in, started working with a recruiter. I went through the MEPS program. Then I was supposed to leave for boot camp in Parris Island a month after I graduated high school in 97. And that was short-lived because in my senior spring break, so we're talking about a month or two before graduation, my parents, they went out of town, left me with a babysitter who left us on his accord to go hang out with his girlfriend. He's a 21-year-old kid, and probably not the best decision as we all look back on it. And just so you know, my parents would approve of this story coming out. So we've all had our moments. We've all grown from this. But we lived on the back of a golf course, and we got really messed up one night. It was on drugs and alcohol and everything else you could possibly imagine. We ended up going on this golf course and thought we were just having some fun, driving golf carts around, crashing stuff. At the end of we did it over 2 days. So 2 nights in a row. At the end of that, we caused like over $2 million worth of damage. And I smile about it. I laugh about it because it was not the right thing to do. That's not what I'm saying. But man, was it fun. And but it was a pinnacle of my life again. It changed everything from that moment on. And And the reason being is we eventually got caught for it. We got caught. There's 12 of us. We all went to jail. We're all facing jail time, major jail time, with that kind of damage and everything to it. I got kicked out of the Marine Corps. They wanted nothing to do with me. So now here was this thing that I held so valuable in my life, and it was just ripped away, but by my own accord. And I always look back at that life as my defining moment of when the spiral really started to go down. And I could see the loss of respect in my father's eyes, and that was tough. And to hide from pain, I would put up a wall. And the best wall I could find was drugs. And so I got deep in the drugs, deep in alcohol, as deep as I could. Again, one's good, 30's better, right? So we're just going after it. There's so much shame on my parents that they had to move out of town. We're like an hour and a half north into the country. We were more city folks, and they moved. I was in jail when they moved, and luckily they gave me the address, so I had some place to go when I got out. But still, I mean, there was so much shame and on myself, and there's so much pain involved. I didn't know any other way to deal with it than through drugs and alcohol. And so it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and doubling, and then more jail time and more jail time and more jail time, and spent the next a good 5 years of my life just going in and out of different jail systems. And I hated myself. I hated the people around me. I hated my family, not because of their fault, but just because I just had hate. I had hate and shame ruled my life at the time, to the point where I would get so angry and so depressed, like I just couldn't handle it. Like it just, I have no other way to explain it other than feeling like just like an elephant was sitting on you with just this heavy amount of shame and just crushing you all the time. I mean, I would wake up in the morning and all I could think about was the bad things I did the day before. And then I'd have to start drinking so I'd stop thinking about it. And then the next day would start and I would think about the past 2 days, and it just kept doubling every day. And so I just started drinking earlier and earlier and earlier. I mean, to the point it would be no problem to have a fifth of whiskey plus the beers plus the other drugs in the course of a day. So, I mean, it was extreme use to try and silence the pain that I had in me. And through this time, I had still have a cousin that lives in Ohio, and she would pray for me. We would talk about things, and apparently I would have these conversations when I was drinking and using and not remember them when I was sober on those rare days. And this went on for almost 2 years with her having these conversations, and she was a woman really filled with faith and loved Jesus and talked about him a lot. And this one day, it was the worst hangover I could ever possibly imagine. I mean, I literally felt like death, and I had to pull the car over and just stop. And like the voices in my head, the pain. I mean, there was voices to end it. Just anything you could possibly imagine. Self-hatred at this point in my life was through the roof. And I remember I just pulled over, and I just had the clearest vision. Like sometimes you get so wound up with a decision you can't think anymore and everything's crazy. It was like that for years for me, but then all of a sudden it was just gone. It was just completely gone, and there was this crossroads sitting in front of me. I was at this fork in the road, and I could either go to Ohio and try a new life there and go for the sobriety, or what I was seeing was like the next drink or drug that I touched was either going to end my life or was going to put me in prison for the rest of my life. Like I just knew it beyond the shadow of a doubt. There was no doubt. Couldn't convince me otherwise. I was scared to death and did not want to go back to prison. Not the best place, despite what you see in the movies. And I made that decision. I still remember calling my cousin Lisa and saying, "Hey, I'm coming down." She's like, "Okay, yeah, I've heard this for 2 years." I'm like, "No, I'm on the road." Told my parents. They were pissed. They're like, "You're on probation. You're going to jail." I'm like, "It's either jail or death at this point. So what's the difference?" Nobody really backed up that decision. They didn't understand it. I mean, heck, I didn't even. I took some drugs with me in case sobriety didn't work out. I mean, that's just a reasonable thing to do there. And I remember having this conversation going down the road, and it was like, is this the right answer? Is this not the right answer? What am I doing here? And just kept going on for a couple hours and starting to get a little crazy in my head. And I remember at one point, just south of Toledo, there's this building on the side of the road, and I happened to look over, and it's like a 60-foot cross, and it says, "Christ is the answer." And it was such a powerful feeling in there. I'm like, man, okay. I don't know what Christ is. I don't know like what this looks like, but I'm going to go after that and sobriety. And I had the drugs that I took with me. I ended up throwing out the window at the time and got down. I started to go to AA and NA with my cousin. And to give you any kind of clout of this whole situation was I went to Yellow Springs to get sober, and that's just kind of the opposite of why people go to Yellow Springs, It was about 2 weeks in when I realized how much drugs was in that town, and didn't think I was any better off leaving Detroit to go there, other than I didn't know the drug dealers. And but I enjoyed sobriety. I had 2 weeks of clean time in me. I was starting to feel good. I was starting to lose a little bit of that shame and hatred. But I had this court case that was looming over me from Detroit, and I had to go back to there for violation of probation. With all the, I picked up like 4 felonies from the golf course incident. There was another one I picked up another 2 federal felonies from. So I got loaded up quick with a pretty good rap sheet, and to the point where the next felony was going to put me as what they would call a habitual offender. So the minimum time I was looking at spending in prison was 12 years. It could have been 12 to 20. I think it was either 12 to 15 or 12 to 25. Either way, a really good portion of my life. Didn't want that. Like, I remember praying with my cousin, not knowing what prayer was, not believing in it, anything like that. But we were praying really for a dismissal in this case, that it would just get waived somehow. Well, anybody with my kind of record, you don't get stuff waived. And we also prayed that there would be like nobody in the court. Well, we prayed that we'd have the judge's full attention, that they would transfer probation, and then I would have a clean slate to start over. And with my cousin being a former probation officer, she kind of knew like, hey, we're going to have some AA sheet signed, some NA sheet signed, some counseling. And she had me on a pretty good course of help for those few weeks before that. Anyways, we got down there. Courts are usually very busy, especially when you start getting into Metro Detroit and things like that. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And we get there. We're the only person on this judge's docket. So it's just my cousin, myself, and the judge in the room. So we've got her complete and undivided attention. And we put our whole spiel and pitch in there. She comes back. She's like, look, this is a state matter. We cannot transfer across state lines. We can't transfer probation. I'm really tied at this point of what I can do with that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dismiss your case. I'm going to waive all charges under the one thing I had to do was come back in 1 year and tell her how my sobriety was going. And it was one of those where it was just unreal to have it happen. So there was my clean slate. We ran out of the courthrooom. I make sure they didn't change their mind once that gavel hit. And it was like freedom. It was like a new chance to start. And I still had a huge road of recovery ahead of me, and I had a lot of repair to do with my family, but a lot of repair to do with myself. And so I focused on that. I focused on myself for the first time in probably my whole life, in a good way. And we went, continue with AA, continue with AA and NA and the programs and everything I could there. I did get involved with the local church here in town with fellowship, and that was really good for me. And it was about 2 years into my sobriety. Could have been a year. It's hard to say at this point, but they were up there on stage talking about, hey, you want to try something new in your life? You're kind of sick of the same old. We're going on a mission trip to the Philippines. It's going to be this 9-day trip. You're going to go with the church. We're going to do, X, Y, and Z while we're there. And I'm like, oh, what the heck? I'll go. I ain't got nothing else going on here. Family was still rough. Didn't have too much for friends, but things were gaining traction there. But I was still working as a mechanic. I hated it at that point because it just reminded me so much of my past life. I was just like, I need to be done with it. I need a fresh start. I can't handle this anymore. I'm going to the Philippines. So we went on that short-term trip there. And while we were there, there was a group of kids, they called them the Dance Boys. If you don't know, the Philippines love their arts. They love their dance. They love their physical art. They love their music. They love their song. And they're very, very folk-orientated culture, a very community-based culture. And so there's these young kids that were hopped up on, they call it shabu shabu, which is a dirty form of crystal meth, if you can imagine. So crystal meth is really dirty to begin with. Wow. It's made with sulfuric acid, and I won't give the recipe.
Yeah, not on the show.
Yeah, right. That's a whole other podcast. But So they were hopped up on shabu shabu, and gosh, what they call it? Basically, they huffed glue. There's this. So imagine America back in the 50s without all the regulations and the warnings on the chemicals and stuff was kind of how the Philippines was in the early 2000s. They were about, I personally say 50 years behind where America was with advancements and chemicals and stuff. So it's really strong glues nonetheless that were very toxic. But it was very cheap for these guys to get a hold of. So they would, I won't give how they do that, but so they would use it. And so, I mean, we're talking young kids. We're talking, anywhere from 10 to 17. I mean, these guys were they had nothing. I mean, you want to talk about poor and the poorest of poor. That's it. And it's like, that's all they had. So they started dancing because, have you ever heard of the Jabberwockies? The guys who wear the white face mask?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
So they're from the Philippines. The name of that group was the Jabberwockies. And so like, oh my gosh, these guys are making it. So everybody started, kind of copying and mimicking those dances. And that's what these kids did. They got noticed by the mission house that I was with was called the Cebu Missionary Foundation. They're like, man, we could help these guys. We can help, kind of promote what they're doing, get them noticed, and kind of give them a purpose in life as well. Anyways, they were at the mission house there. They kind of invited them over when all of us from fellowship were there. And part of the group is, I think this happens a lot with Christians, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but like we get somebody who has a bit of a messed up past, maybe with some drugs and alcohol, and found the Lord. Like, oh, you got to go talk to the young kids. You always get to the young kids table before you get to the adults table. And so I shared my testimony at like a young kids, like a youth group type thing is what we would call it here. And didn't think much of it. I had a translator, so I had no idea how it went. I mean, they didn't speak a lick of English. Maybe a couple words they learned from movies, stuff like that, but had no real understanding of English. So you have to have a translator with everything. So I did that, but I didn't expect anything of it. I do remember when I turned things over to God, I said, help me get sober, and I'll do anything you want me to do, but here's my restrictions. I'm never leaving the country, and I'm never going back to prison. And within a year of my amazing declaration to God, I was in the Philippines speaking in a women's prison. And it was one of those, no planning, no nothing. We were on our way to visit. I'm like, this is great. Let's see what this is like. And the pastor turned around in the van and he said, hey, did we tell you that you're going to be giving your testimony at the women's prison? And I'm like, no. And so I got to share it again. So on that trip, I got to share it twice. Thought everything was cool. I'm like, that was great. I didn't think much of it. When we were going to leave, they always have like a going away ceremony for the visitors. And those dance boys, they got up and grabbed the mic and personally thanked Fellowship for bringing me down because they felt that in me they had a story that they could relate to. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. Not like in a prideful way, but yeah, of course they did. But it was the first time in my life I saw something positive come from drugs and alcohol. And I'm like, this is it. Like, man, I felt alive. And I was alive, sober, and that was huge. And I'm like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And so I did what any rational person would do. I went to the pastor and said, hey, I know we're flying out tonight, but I'm just going to stay here. You guys are good to go back. I'll figure it out. When they got done laughing, they convinced me that wasn't the way to go about things. And went back and met with Grant Edwards, who was at the time the senior pastor of Fellowship. And he kind of took me under his wing for the next, I think it was 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, somewhere in there. Went back to the Philippines. I'm like, hey, let's just try this out for a year, see if this was just a fluke, just had a good time on this trip, or is this really something maybe that's more purposeful in my life? And so yeah, I went there for a year, and it was confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt, like, that's it. Like, teaching and leading people was what I wanted to do. Like, using my past to do something good with. That's the heart of who I am. And so we did it. I just came back again, saved up some more money, started to build more of like a mini foundation within the foundation, and went back again. Ended up spending about 7 years there. It was interesting because when I got there, I'm like, earlier I was like, I don't want to be a mechanic anymore. I need that clean start. I'm like, I'm not telling anybody I was a mechanic, because I didn't tell a single soul that I worked on cars. And about 3 months in, the founder of that mission foundation goes, hey, we were talking to your pastor, and he told us you're a mechanic. And I'm like, oh no. And she's like, we have a whole fleet of vehicles that nobody knows how to fix. And in the Philippines, it's 95 degrees, solid humidity, 4 degrees off the equator. So, I mean, you want to talk about hot and nasty, the worst place to work on cars. Tools were at minimal at best. Parts were just as bad. And again, it was like going back in time. Like there was no just replacing parts. You had to take them somewhere, that we'd have to rebuild them. So it was like going back in time. And like, to me though, it was like, oh, this is great. It's like a whole nother chapter of the puzzle. This is what I've always done is make things work. And just, fell in love with it. We started to get that fleet fixed up. I mean, they're fixing brakes with duct tape and ruptured brake lines. And they actually went out on me when we were going through the mountains one day. And that's how I found out what they were doing. And so I'm like, man, maybe this is a new avenue. Maybe, because it can get, I hope this doesn't come out wrong, but it can get kind of old, like just handing out food and supplies to people. Like, and what you end up seeing if you're there for long enough is like, it causes the locals to stop caring about how to live better. And they're like, why? Someone will just come, we'll get handouts. They're not saying those words, but you can tell by their actions and everything that they're doing. Like, why? All I got to do is show up to these rallies. Or I got to show up to this street feeding, and I get fed. I don't have to do anything. And then inevitably, it always seems something happened with a missions foundation, and whether the funding fell through or whatever. Then these people were left in a worse spot than when we found them. Because now we've caused them to depend upon us, and now we've just ripped this away from them. And now they're like, what do we do now? We forgot how to survive. And I'm like, what if we change this up? And like, what if we could teach these guys or girls, whoever wanted to, what if we could teach them a trade? What if we could show them how to work on cars and give them a technical aspect and a physical aspect and training, and bring these guys up to speed where they could go anywhere in the world to this trade, which is the beauty of auto mechanics is the principles are sound. I don't care what language they're in. I don't care what country they're in. They're the same principles in America as they are in the Philippines, as they are in Japan. And that was really inspiring to me. I'm like, we can do this. And so we started to put a automotive trade school in the works. And so we would get tools donated from America. And then we were working with the local guys to teach them the foundation in mechanics. And it was just really powerful. It really revived my love for the auto world. It can get to a place, it's a stressful world and a painful world. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, it's absolutely beautiful. And that's really, and it was a long intro to your question there, but that's kind of how I got into the Philippines and kind of what the Philippines did for me in mechanics, at least.
And then how were you able to take some of those things that I would even call them foundational changes and bring that to, it wasn't Zima at the time, but right. What has then become Zima Automotive?
Yeah. So we did that. There's the kind of the new love of auto mechanics and what it could be. And it really, I haven't really thought about it until now, but it was kind of my first look into like ownership of a business. It was like, wow, I got to be more than just a mechanic. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it gave me an open door. I'm like, okay. So when I came back to America, I started working as a technician because it was very easy to get a job. Probably still is, if you know what you're doing. Very high demand for auto technicians and especially skilled technicians. And I studied the trade a lot. It's been a part of my whole life, so I know it well. And I'm not saying that just to brag or to puff myself up, but like I get it. It's the one thing that I can always get and always understand. And so I started working for other people, and it was trash, just absolute trash, because all they cared about was their bottom dollar. All they cared about was money. They would pay people trash, and they would treat them like trash, and their shops were trash. And I'm like, gosh, there's so much more. It's just like, I want to do more with this, and kind of, I want to do what I had in the Philippines, but here. And because at the time, the Philippines was not an open door to go and do that for certain reasons. And so I started working for people. It wasn't it. So I'm like, so I put myself through training. And I would go to Kansas City. There's a huge auto network there for training once a year. And I would hop around the country to like the best training that I can find. I'm like, whatever, I'm just going to make myself the best of my craft that I can be. And so you start talking to people, you start coming up with new ideas. And I'm like, man, if I formed an LLC, if I formed a company that I can then go to these shops, and I'm no longer an employee, I'm a contract worker. So I can carry all my own insurance. I can carry all my, basically I'm a independent businessman at that point, and they loved it. So I could go to this shop, I could work 15 hours there. I would go to this shop, I'd work 20 hours here. And I'd be like, hey, I'm not coming in for 2 days. And I'd be like, okay, and because I'm not on payroll, so I would write my own tickets. I was really into what I was doing, so they didn't have to train me. They didn't have to worry about me. They just knew when I was going there, I was working, and that's all I cared about was working. And starting that, I picked up a huge ambulance fleet out in Vandalia. So I was servicing 24 ambulances about 3 days a week, to the point where they let me build a shop inside their garage where they kept these ambulances. And it was really cool. One of my customers actually got me that gig, and he said, hey, we got a guy out here. He took all the ambulances apart, and he can't figure out how they go back together. And I'm like, oh, this is the best puzzle ever. And so went out there. Within a year, I got an entire fleet back up and running to the point where they were saving about $45,000 a month just on the maintenance and the program that we built for them. And all that just it kept fueling. I'm like, this is great, but now I want to do it more. It's still the addict mentality. If one ambulance is good, then let's get a couple shops going. And so it became less and less working for other people and more working just for me. I lived in the Northridge area at the time here in Springfield, which I think is probably the biggest subdivision in Springfield area. And so I started working on everybody's car there, to the point where we are so busy there that we had both sides of the street up and down were completely lined with cars. I had to work on all the neighbors' cars for free so they wouldn't report me. Then I kept getting cease and desist letters from the county saying I couldn't run a business out of my house, to the point where now I had to scatter the cars. So I had the most elusive map of the subdivision in my office, and I would have to park cars and label, and I have to hide them across the neighborhood so I didn't get in trouble because I couldn't find a building, and I wanted to be in the Northridge area. It was something in my heart. Like, there's nothing out there. Everything was on the south side or downtown area if there was. I'm like, it's just where I want to be. It's where I live. I love this community. I love the Kenton Ridge area. I mean, it's just, for whatever reason, it speaks really deeply in my heart. And so I got my final cease and desist letter where they actually came and they said, you've got 24 hours to shut it down or we're taking your house. And I'm like, okay, they're serious. And so we did. And I couldn't find a shop anywhere. I was working with a realtor. And again, one of my customers, he said, why don't try mine? Great lady, try her. And I'm like, whatever, I'll try it, but it ain't going to work. I know every building in this area and nothing's available. And she's like, I don't do commercial, but my partner does. And he's like, I just got this lease that opened up today, and I got to fill it within 2 weeks. He had this huge deadline to get done, and it happened to be where we're currently now with Zima Automotive. So it was like the one area I wanted to be in. It was a 4-bay shop, 4 bays when we started. It was about 1,700 square feet. It was just like absolutely perfect. It's like everything just fell into place. I tried so hard to will it on my own. It's like when I finally just stopped, it just came to happen right where I wanted to be. It opened up. I was just like the happiest person in the world that like now I'm going from working in my house, which I never stopped working because there's all those cars there. And even though it's Saturday, it's in Sunday, and the kids were super young. My son was, he was born there. So, from there until 7, he lived there. So that whole young era where you kind of just put him in the corner and, with another person. Oh, I didn't leave him there. I was not working on cars. So don't call Child Protective Services. With my wife was at home helping. And, but it was that time of life. I'm like, you know what? Hey, we went through the Dave Ramsey program. I'm like, let's get out of debt. I mean, we were just slaying debt. We were just bettering our lives. This building opened up, and it allowed us the chance to walk right into it. And, Dave Ramsey, of all people, actually talks about it. Like, when entrepreneurs start, the best thing that we can do is it's always going to be a leap of faith. It's always going to be a leap from the dock to the boat. Right. And so, but the thing we can do is get that boat as close to the dock as possible. So when we have to take that leap, it might just be a step. Yeah. And it was frustrating for many years because I'm like, man, I want the building, man, I want the shop. I want it all. But it couldn't get there. But through it all, we just kept building clientele, kept building customers, kept building a name for us in the community. Because that's daunting to go from no overhead at your garage to thousands on top of that. I mean, the auto industry has so much overhead. It's unlike any other business. I think the only thing that really rivals it is Medicare. medical and hospitals, just the amount of departments and the overhead that you got to have. And so it's extremely scary. I'm like, and that's what really kept me from being more aggressive with pulling that trigger at first. But through all that, it was really a godsend, because we built this huge clientele of people, and we're like, hey, we're moving 2 miles down the road. Everybody's like, you're getting your building. Like we got to share the dream over the years and share it with people. And like the whole community was excited, probably because they got parking back on their street, but for the most part, but they were so supportive. So when we moved into there, it was just like everybody, instead of going to the house, they just came there. It was just instant business. It was streamless. To the point we just kept growing at such a fast rate we couldn't keep up with it. We went from a 1,700 square foot in 2018 when we signed the initial lease to, it would have been 2000. It would have been COVID. By the end of COVID, by the end of 2020, we had expanded from 1,800 square feet to 12,000 square feet. So huge expansion. I mean, we grew so fast, almost too fast. Like it was hard to manage, and with that came all of its own issues and problems as well. And I still remember I was so excited to sign that lease, I forgot to look if there was plumbing. And so I signed this lease, this 5-year lease for the shop, and there's no plumbing in the shop. So it means there's no restrooms. And we're like, what are we going to do? And so there's another building on the same property right in front of it. So we got them to tie in the bathrooms to the lease so we could go. But it was pretty funny. You get so excited to do things, sometimes you don't think of the basics.
Absolutely.
So, but that's kind of how we got to start into that building.
So this is something that I've always known as Zima, even before I kind of got involved in the business community, is that staple green. Where was that just a fun accident, or do you have a fun story with that?
It's not fun. It's kind of dumb, but it just worked. Like so, as most mechanics, we're kind of tool junkies, and Snap-on comes and puts us in debt forever, and they drive their trucks up there, and I bought a green toolbox, and it was the green that Zima is now. It was green, and then didn't think much of it until I was working in my garage, and I'm like, man, I need a new floor. Like, I need a fancy floor. So there was epoxy chip floors. I'm like, I'm going to do this. We haven't spent money on anything. We paid off all of our debt. Like, let's invest a little bit here. And the guy came out, and he's like, dude, I could match the flake to your box. And I'm like, nah, you can't do that. And he's like, yeah. He's like, we'll throw some black in there, and some green and some white. It'll be sick. And like, that's how the colors came to be. And then the black and green were just so good together. I just went with it, and it just worked very well. So it wasn't really ever sought out and planned that way. It just kind of evolved that way, and it was just very organic how that came apart. But that's really the secret behind the black and green.
I've always seen that, and I've always wondered. So now kind of what you do and the way that you carry yourself and honestly have built Zima, how does that affect everyone around you, and not just you as Max, but your team, the community, your customers?
Yeah, so I mean that's a huge piece, and that's something I had to come to terms with about 3 years ago. So we talked about, I got sober in 2005 from drugs and alcohol. About 10 years after that, I did relapse on alcohol, started drinking again. 10 years sober. I thought I could have a beer, so I did have a beer one day. I was actually in the Philippines. Man, it was probably, I didn't want anything more. Like, I actually started getting a little buzz. I'm like, no, not for me. Put it aside. I've always been a bit into health and fitness, and I'm like, oh man, there's benefits to wine. I could have a glass of wine with dinner now that I'm not an alcoholic. And so I started with a glass of wine. It wasn't long, and I say this to warn anybody who's listening and thinks they can do this, that you just can't. Like, it went from a glass of wine to a bottle of whiskey in the blink of an eye. I mean, probably within 12 months, if that. It got bad fast. All this, the stress of starting a business. One thing I don't think a lot of people understand is the amount of stress and worry that comes with the business, especially as you start to grow. And I never went to a business school. I went to college, but it was for auto mechanics, and I mean their academic side was mediocre at best. I mean, they didn't care. They were just passing us to get us out of class, and there was a grease monkey smelling like fuel coming in all day. I think they just got us out of the classes. But I mean, there was no business. No, like, this is how you operate a business. This is a profit and loss statement. This is a balance sheet. There was none of that, So it's you're kind of trial by fire, and you're kind of learning everything as you go. And the stress of that, plus now I have families looking at me that are other than my own to provide for them. And I'm like, that's a lot. Like when these guys start looking at you and like, hey, we trust you to help us make a living for our family. Once that starts hitting, it can be crushing. And if you don't have the right people in your life to guide you through that, I turned to alcohol, and it was the one thing I knew. How do you silence the pain? How do you make the voices go away? You drown them. That was always my excuse in life, or that was my go-to. Just make them go away, make them stop. So that's what I did. So like that first, I got to put my timeline together here. For about 2018 to 2021, I was in the worst state of alcoholism I've ever been in my life. Those people out there with cars, I wasn't drinking while I was working on cars, but I would clock off at 4 and I would start drinking immediately. And I wouldn't stop until I either passed out or blacked out. And that was a daily occurrence for me, which bled with you can't run a business drunk. You can't run a life. You can't be you when you're drunk all the time. You can't be the father you need to be, the employer you need to be, a husband you need to be, a wife you need to be, whoever you are. You can't do it under the influence of alcohol. You just can't. And about 3 years ago, things were the worst I've ever been in my life with alcoholism. Business was thriving, but everything outside of business was absolutely crumbling, to the point where there was suicide attempts. There was the state of depression was absolutely insane. The what I call the voices were back, and that was just the shame, the shame and overwhelming and everything that came with it was all there. And a really big family incident happened that I probably won't talk about on here. Happened that it caused me to realize how much pain I was causing other people and how bad I had hurt them. And so that was enough for me. It was a lifetime of shame at that point. So I hung it up. That was November 21st of 21. So I just celebrated 3 years sober again. But it was at that moment, right before that decision, we got stolen from in the business by an employee we're literally hours away from bankruptcy. We had state agencies at the door. We had the silver bracelets were out. It was bad again. And it was just like, Max, get your shit together. And it was another one of those defining moments. Like, this is no longer you. This is no longer you and your family. This is you and these 6 other families that are here right now, and they're all depending upon you, and you got to get it together. You got to start doing what's right. I found a group of auto shop owners. It's a nationwide program. And I really attribute any of success from that moment on from that group, because it was finally, I was like around these other like-minded people who would understand the pain, who would understand the pressure, who would understand the stress. It allowed me the right places to vent rather than venting at the bar or, in a bottle and a drug, whatever it may be for somebody. It kept me away from that. And it gave me a place and somebody to talk to and realize that I wasn't alone, and that, hey, we're mechanics. We didn't go to school for this, but we got to learn it, because now we've got a system that we have to put in place, and we've got people that we have to protect. And at the end of the day, there's a real joy in that for me, is knowing that other people trust me enough with their life and their livelihood, that they still trust me to lead them and to be in that position of leadership. And it all goes back to, that servant mentality that was so powerful in the Philippines, and why I enjoyed it so much, because that was a time of leading other people. That was a time of saying, hey, how can I go below and lift you up? How can I serve you? How can I make you the best version of you that you can be? And then I got to realize, like, I get to do that every day as a shop owner. And it's not just about mechanics, like the guys that I talked about that I didn't want to be around, that I didn't want to be like, that had dirty shops, that treated their employees like crap, that were only about money. Like, I realized 3 years ago that I was at that point where I get to make that decision. Like, am I going to be for myself, or am I going to serve the community around me? And it kind of lit me on fire for the whole ownership side of business versus just, they always say, you can't work in your business. You got to work on your business. Right. And it gets to a point where that clicks, and you're right. I can no longer be just a mechanic. I can't be a service provider. I can't be on the front counter, because I've got, maybe currently 5 technicians, 3 office staff, an assistant. We've got accountants, we've got CPAs, we've got all these people that are being fed through this company. And excuse me. And it's inspiring to me to know that like that people trust the vision enough, that they're bought into the vision and they believe what we're doing, that they want to be a part of that. And to me, it's the greatest thrill that there is knowing that like I can take this vision and I can take this purpose and like other people want to be a part of it. And it gives me that chance to speak into people's lives, to share my history, to share the pain and to share the shame, and to really maybe help anybody from going down that road.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your story has been super inspiring for several reasons. Now, how can people get a hold of you if they're wanting to learn more about you and your story, or have you service their vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, they can always call the shop and they can ask for me. I got a private line there, and they'll give you that. That's the best way. I mean, other than that, I mean, I'm on Facebook. You can shoot me that a messenger on there. It's Max Zima on Facebook. That's a lot of people get a hold of me that way. Yeah, I mean, email max@zimaautomotive.com. Great way. But I'm always open to talk to people, always open to be a part of anything in anybody's life.
Wonderful. Before we sign off, I got a few rapid fire questions for you. What is your dream car?
So here it is. I am probably the one auto shop owner you'll ever meet that does not like cars. I don't get into sports cars. I don't get into classic cars. I don't get into project cars. I want nothing to do with cars. But I do like boats, and I have a dream to have a 120-foot sailboat and sail from the East Coast to Spain and get a cup of coffee and come back.
That is killer. Yeah, I'm not a car guy. I'm an airplane guy. Okay. I really want a Cessna, but I totally get it. It was sweet. Awesome, man. I appreciate you being on the show.
All right, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.